Good evening. If you still have a Twitter account, for whatever reason, then you might have noticed that over the weekend, the hashtag #ArrestFauci was trending. Why? Well, part of the reason might have to do with newly uncovered documents which show that Dr. Fauci was funding 4 different laboratories which were conducting experiments on puppies, which involved both torturing as well as killing them. Meanwhile, as the Biden administration has stopped the construction of the southern border wall and calling it a waste of money, newly released government documents show that the Department of Homeland Security is spending nearly $500,000 on building a wall around Joe Biden's Delaware beach house. And then lastly, while I was down in Texas, I took the opportunity to sit down and speak with Mr. Kevin Freeman, who is the host of the Economic War Room, and we discussed the economic warfare that China is waging against the United States, as well as how you and me can weaponize our money to better fight for our values. Let's go through it all together. This is your daily Facts Matter update, and I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. And now let's begin today's discussion by talking about Dr. Fauci. And to start with, as I mentioned in the introduction, if you still use Twitter for whatever reason, then you might have noticed that on Sunday, the hashtag #ArrestFauci was trending as the number one topic nationally here in America. Why? Well, according to this bipartisan letter here, which was sent by 24 different members of Congress, it revealed the fact that Dr. Fauci's agency, which is of course the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, that it spent millions of dollars in taxpayer funding to fund research that involved abusing and killing live dogs. Now, to start with, just for clarification, in case you're not aware of how it all works, this is the organizational breakdown for the NIH. And so as you can see, the NIH, which is the National Institutes of Health, sits underneath the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, otherwise known as the HHS. And then the NIH has 27 different subdivisions, which are called either institutes or centers. And each one has its own specific function and duty. And among them, you have the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, which is run by Dr. Anthony Fauci. And according to these newly obtained documents right here, Dr. Fauci's department spent 1.6 million taxpayer dollars, meaning money from you and me, in order to fund experiments which involve torturing and killing dozens of Beagle puppies. Specifically, according to these documents, which were, by the way, obtained by a nonprofit called the White Coat Waste Project, they're a group that actually monitors taxpayer spending in regards to these types of scientific experiments, they found that these experiments were conducted in several different laboratories across America, as well as in one laboratory over in North Africa. And in terms of what these experiments actually entailed, well, let's go through some of them together. The first one was actually uncovered back in 2016, and it was conducted as such. Quote, "In the basement of NIAID's lab in Bethesda, Maryland, infectious sandflies were strapped to beagles and fed on them for 22 months. The dogs developed infectious lesions before Fauci's staff killed and dissected them." Then the second round of experiments was exposed in September of 2020, where, quote, "A $424,000 grant for animal experiments at the University of Georgia, where healthy beagles are drugged, then intentionally infested with parasite-carrying fleas." Now, the third round of experiments, they were exposed in August of 2021, so just a few months ago. And this nonprofit, it found that Dr. Fauci's agency, it shipped part of a $375,000 grant to a lab over in Tunisia. And Tunisia, by the way, in case you're not aware, it's a country located in the north of Africa, and the NIH has no oversight there. And according to this nonprofit, there are no laws in that country protecting animals that are used in experiments. And in these Tunisian experiments, which are again paid for by Dr. Fauci's agencies, which means ultimately that they're paid for by you and me, the American taxpayer, these beagles were, quote, "drugged, but this time their heads were locked in mesh cages filled with hundreds of infected sandflies." And if you want to see what that actually looks like, and warning, this image is a bit disturbing, here is a picture of those dogs laying there as their heads are eaten alive by sandflies. And specifically, these experiments over in Tunisia, they got pretty bad. Here's in fact how the nonprofit, here's how they described the experiments that we were partly funding over in North Africa. Quote, "Our investigators show that Fauci's National Institutes of Health division shipped part of a $375,800 grant to a lab in Tunisia to drug beagles and lock their heads in mesh cages filled with angry sandflies so that the insects could eat them alive. They also locked beagles alone in cages in the desert overnight for 9 consecutive nights to use them as bait to attract infectious sandflies." And then lastly, the fourth experiment, which was just exposed a few days ago, Dr. Fauci's agency spent $1.6 million of, again, your and my taxpayer money to poison and debark 44 Beagle puppies. Here's how this report describes it. Quote, Fauci's taxpayer-funded white coats injected and force-fed the puppies an experimental drug for several weeks before killing and dissecting them. These dogs were subject to some of the cruelest treatment imaginable. In a procedure called a cordectomy, sometimes called debarking, the puppies' vocal cords were slashed. Why? So Fauci's white coats wouldn't have to hear them cry. And it was in fact this last point, the cordectomy, that the 24 lawmakers who sent the bipartisan letter over to Dr. Fauci, that is what they highlighted. In fact, here's what they wrote on this particular point in their letter. Quote, from October 2018 until February 2019, NIAID spent $1.68 million in taxpayer funds on drug tests involving 44 Beagle puppies. The dogs were all between 6 and 8 months old. The commission tests involved injecting and force-feeding the puppies an experimental drug for several weeks before killing and dissecting them. Of particular concern is the fact that the invoice to NIAID include a line item for cordectomy. As you are likely aware, a cordectomy, also known as devocalization, involves slitting a dog's vocal cords in order to prevent them from barking, howling, or crying. This cruel procedure, which is opposed with rare exceptions by the American Veterinary Medical Association, the American Animal Hospital Association, and others, seems to have been performed so that experimenters would not have to listen to the pained cries of the Beagle puppies. This is a reprehensible misuse of taxpayer funds. And that is, frankly, not only a misuse of taxpayer funds, according to the lawmakers, but it is also very hard to read. But even worse than the cordectomy itself might be the fact that it might have actually not been necessary at all. That's because the NIH claims that these experiments were conducted to, and this is a quote, provide data of suitable quality and integrity to support application to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, meaning the FDA, and other regulatory agencies. So they're basically saying that they conducted these tests on dogs and puppies in order to give good enough data to the FDA. But after these reports came out earlier this year, the reports that came out in the summer, the FDA disputed part of that claim. In fact, the FDA issued a fairly lengthy statement, and they said in part, quote, the FDA requires that an FDA-approved medical product must be demonstrated to be safe and effective. The FDA does not mandate that human drugs be studied in dogs. However, when you actually read the entire statement that the FDA put out, it's not as clear-cut as that small snippet makes it seem, because what the FDA is essentially saying is that the experimenters do have to study their drug on an animal of some sort. It just doesn't necessarily have to be a dog. For instance, sometimes they use hamsters or rats instead. But regardless of the FDA statement, according to White Coast Waste Project, that nonprofit we mentioned earlier, around 20,000 puppies as well as dogs are used every single year in these FDA-sanctioned experiments. Now, thus far, by the way, there has been no public statement from either Dr. Fauci or from his agency. In fact, we here at the Epoch Times, we reached out to Dr. Fauci's agencies, but we have yet to hear back with any sort of comment. And by the way, what I didn't mention is that in terms of the hashtag #ArrestFauci that was trending on Twitter, there's another aspect to it that I didn't mention, and that is the fact that the NIH recently released a letter which implies that they were in fact funding gain-of-function research over in China, which goes directly against statements that Dr. Fauci made while he was testifying under oath in Congress. Now, we'll actually discuss that point more later in tomorrow's episode. However, I thought I'd mention it here in regards to that hashtag that was trending over on Twitter. Regardless, if you'd like to read about these poor puppies that we discussed, I'll throw the links to the articles, including the letter from Congress. It'll all be in the description box below this video for you to check out. And all I ask in return is that you take a quick moment to smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. That way the YouTube algorithm will be forced to share this video out to potentially thousands of more people and let the truth be known far and wide. And now, before we move on over and discuss how Joe Biden instructed the Department of Homeland Defense to spend nearly $500,000 building a wall around his Delaware beach house, I would like to take a quick moment and introduce our sponsor for today's episode, and I will do so from the sound booth. That's right, Roman. The sponsor of today's episode is an awesome company called American Hartford Gold. As I'm sure you're aware, the rate of inflation right now in this country is accelerating like crazy. I mean, everything from the cost of lumber, cars, houses, food, gas, everything is increasing at an accelerated pace. However, in my opinion, what the most amazing aspect of the system is that you can take this money, which I actually think is as fake as monopoly money because the Fed and the Treasury just print this out of nothing, and you can use it to buy real money from American Hartford Gold, which is gold and silver coinage. Take a look. This is a box that I get every single month from American Hartford Gold sent to me because I believe it's a great hedge against inflation. This is something that has had value for 5,000 years. It's had value across the world in Russia, China, America, India. I mean, this is the real stuff right here. This is a beautiful, actually Canadian maple. And this is right here is some silver coinage. I don't know if you can see how shiny and beautiful it is. Yeah, but I just get these every single month because I believe that unfortunately the US dollar will eventually fall as the global reserve currency, as sad as that is. And I just want to hedge against those people in Washington, D.C. continuously printing our prosperity into oblivion. And I would highly recommend that you do the same. Go on over to the website for American Hartford Gold and consider doing business with them. They're an awesome company. They sponsor a program like ours, so they obviously care about the truth getting out there, but they also have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have a great customer support staff when you call them. They're super friendly, and they make the entire process super simple. Because not only can you get these packages here delivered directly to your doorstep, but you can call them up and set it up so that you can actually get gold and silver directly deposited into your IRA account, again, making it all super simple. And right now they're offering a special to viewers of Facts Matter, where depending on how much you buy, how much gold and silver you buy, they will throw in $1,500 worth of free silver on your first order. So give them a call at 866-242-2352 or text Roman to 65532. Also, I'll throw a link to their website down in the description box below. And American Hartford Gold, thank you so much for sponsoring this episode. Now, Roman in the studio, back to you. And now let's move on over and talk about the U.S. southern border. And to start with, last week, Border Patrol released their most recent numbers, and it showed that in the fiscal year 2021, Border Patrol agents apprehended a total of 1,666,167 illegal immigrants. This is, just for your reference, by the way, the highest number on record ever since the Border Patrol agency was first formed all the way back in the year 1925. And furthermore, besides the people who were actually apprehended at the U.S. southern border trying to sneak in, according to this official data, an additional 294,352 people were stopped after they tried to enter at an actual port of entry, but without legal paperwork, meaning that they were likely trying to sneak in at a legal port of entry. And so when you add these numbers together, you get almost 2 million people who were apprehended trying to sneak in the fiscal year 2021. 2 million people. However, that is not the full picture, because as you likely guessed, there are people who were not apprehended because they were either not detected or they were detected, but they somehow managed to avoid getting captured. And in terms of these people, there are not really official numbers that actually come out of the Border Patrol agency. However, according to the former Border Patrol Commissioner, Mr. Mark Morgan, last week, he told Republican lawmakers that he estimates that the number of gotaways, meaning the people who were detected but they evaded capture, was at least 400,000 this year. 400,000 illegal aliens who were detected, but they somehow managed to escape. And of course, in terms of the number of illegal aliens who were never detected at all, well, that number is a mystery. And so when you add all of these numbers up, it could very well be the case that in the fiscal year 2021, between 2.5 and 3 million illegal aliens were either apprehended or they managed to cross into the United States. Now, if you've been paying attention, you know that these numbers have shot up significantly after Joe Biden assumed the presidency. So for instance, in December of 2020, which was President Trump's last full month in office, Border Patrol agents arrested 74,000 illegal immigrants at the U.S. southern border. However, in January, the month right afterward, when Joe Biden took over, he immediately changed a number of Trump's policies. For instance, he paused deportations, he stopped the construction of the border wall, he stopped the Remain in Mexico program, he reversed the ban on travel from terror-prone countries, and he stopped enforcing Title 42, which was a health policy that immediately expelled illegal immigrants that crossed into America. And then, surprisingly, by July, so 7 months after he took office, the number of people that Border Patrol agents were arresting every single month had almost tripled, all the way up to 213,500. And so obviously, just based on these raw numbers alone, this problem has been getting worse. However, in the month of September, so just last month, a new dimension was added to the border crisis. And that dimension was the Haitian migrants. That's because around the end of September, around 15,000 migrants from Haiti, they suddenly showed up at the U.S. southern border and formed what can only be described as primitive encampments under the international bridge over at the Del Rio, Texas area of the border. During that particular crisis, there were so many people under that bridge that Border Patrol was actually forced to close nearby highway checkpoints because the state and local law enforcement officers, they had to drop what they were doing and go to the bridge to provide security. And after all was said and done, out of those 15,000 Haitians, the Biden administration, they released over 12,000 of them into the interior of the United States, with the expectation being that they would eventually check in with their local ICE office or turn up to the immigration court for their hearing. Although thus far it's not clear what percentage of these Haitians have done that. However, it looks like we are poised for a repeat performance. That's because, likely after seeing how successful this method of getting into America actually is, there are reports that right now, between 60,000 and 85,000 Haitians are making their way up to the U.S. southern border. Let me just repeat that. It was reported that right now, between 60,000 and 85,000 Haitian migrants are making their way up to the U.S. southern border in order to get into America. And if you look online, you will find many videos, in fact, many videos of these people making their way up through Central America and Mexico as they're making their way up to the U.S. southern border. Take a look. In fact, one of those videos showed these migrants being able to push past a line of Mexican police officers who were trying to block their path. Now, during the CNN presidential town hall just last week, while they were discussing the southern border, Mr. Anderson Cooper, he asked Joe Biden whether he has any plans to visit the southern border. And Joe Biden, he answered that he's been there before and that he just doesn't have time. Take a look. I've been there before, and I haven't. I mean, I know it well. I guess I should go down, but the whole point of it is I haven't had a whole heck of a lot of time to get down. I've been spending time going around looking at the $900 billion worth of damage done by hurricanes and floods and weather and traveling around the world, but I plan on. Now, my wife Jill has been down. She's been on both sides of the river. She's seen the circumstances there. She's looked into those places. Well, it's good to know that at least Joe Biden's wife has been down there recently, although exactly what that means in terms of the southern border crisis, it's not exactly clear. But there is something interesting to note, and that is, during Joe Biden's statement that we just heard, he began his answer by saying that he's been there before, meaning that he's been to the U.S. southern border before. However, the question is when? When was he actually down there last? And so, during a recent press briefing, in fact, at a press briefing last week, Peter Doocy, who is the Fox News White House correspondent, he asked Jen Psaki about exactly this question. He asked her when Joe Biden was at the southern border last. And here was her answer. As you may have seen, there has been reporting that Joe Biden did drive through the border when he was on the campaign trail in 2008. And he is certainly familiar with the fact, and it stuck with him, the fact that in El Paso, the border goes right through the center of town. So let me just pause here for a moment. There are reports that at this very moment, 60,000 illegal immigrants are about to show up on the Mexican side of the border and try to force their way into this country. And while discussing the topic, Joe Biden says that he hasn't had time to go down to the border, but he has been down there before. But when pressed about exactly when he's been down there, Jen Psaki said that he drove through El Paso in 2008 while he was on the campaign trail. Think about that. 2008. That was 13 years ago, back when George W. Bush was still president. Now, it's also worth noting that while Joe Biden claims that he hasn't had time to go down to the U.S. southern border for a visit, it is interesting to note that during the 10 months that he's been in office, he has taken 25 trips to Delaware, his home state. And furthermore, while on the one hand, Joe Biden has stopped the construction of a southern border wall in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, he has, on the other hand, directed the Department of Homeland Security to spend $500,000 to build a wall around his Delaware beach house. Let me just repeat that. Joe Biden has paused the construction of the southern border wall, while at the same time, he has had the Department of Homeland Security spend $456,000 to construct a wall around his Delaware beach house. Now, specifically, according to these receipts that you can, by the way, find for yourself over at usaspending.gov, the Department of Homeland Security awarded this contract to a company called Turnstone Holdings, which is a local builder over in Delaware. And here's what the contract says the nature of the work is. Quote, purchase and installation of security fencing at 32 Farview, Rehoboth, Delaware. Now, just for your reference, by the way, 32 Farview is the home that Joe Biden bought in the summer of 2017. And according to local county tax records, he paid a cool $2.7 million for that particular property, which is now getting a government-funded $500,000 wall paid for by the taxpayers, you and me. Ironically, by the way, on the very same day that this contract was brought to public light, Jen Psaki held a public press briefing where she said this about President Trump's border policy. Trump's immigration policy resulted in separating kids from their parents, building a border wall that's feckless and that cost billions of dollars for taxpayers. Joe Biden fundamentally disagrees on how we need to approach the immigration issue. If you'd like to read more about the wall that Joe Biden is building around his home over in Delaware, or about the situation over at the U.S. southern border, I'll throw those links into the description box below this video for you to check out. And all I ask in return is that you take a quick moment to smash that like button if you haven't already for the YouTube algorithm. And now let's move on over and talk about financial warfare. Now, while I was down in Texas for myself, I had the opportunity to sit down and speak with Mr. Kevin Freeman, who is the host of the Economic War Room, and we discussed not only the state of economic warfare as it relates to China, but also how everyday Americans can weaponize their money in order to fight for their values. Take a look. The first thing I'd like to discuss is that some of the viewers at home, when they think of war, they think of missiles, ships, planes. A lot of people don't think of the financial aspects of war. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, well, economics has been a part of war since the Peloponnesian Wars. I mean, you go back to Athens and Sparta and all of that. In fact, in World War II, we had a Bureau of Economic Warfare that FDR set up. But when the wall fell in Germany, under the Clinton administration primarily, they decided they wanted to separate economics and national security, and they did that. So we no longer think in terms of economic war, but economics are at the heart of every war, every conflict of man. They say it's all about the money. It really is ultimately all about the money.
Wow. Can you give us an idea of who the biggest threat financially for America is today?
Well, there's no question it's China. China's been in an economic war with us since since 1999, when the book Unrestricted Warfare was first published. They have ramped it up in large part recently. Xi Jinping has been very profound at his economic war, but it's including intellectual property theft, which is a type of economic war. It's stealing trade secrets, it's trade, unfair trade practices, it's listing companies on our stock exchange that don't conform to our accounting standards. All of these are forms of economic warfare.
So one thing that they're doing is they're creating a digital yuan, right? A digital form of their currency.
Correct.
Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, it's a very dangerous thing. I mean, first paper money was the yuan, and it was created in China, and that first paper money had no backing, no gold, silver, anything behind it, and it failed miserably and caused hyperinflation. And right now they're talking about building a digital version of it, and what's scary about this is the control that it would allow. If they create a digital yuan and we start using it around the world, even in their own country, it's going to remove any semblance of privacy. They'll know exactly who's spending what, when, and where. And they'll be able to program it, turn it off. For example, if you get a certain amount of money, they can tell you can use it only in this location but not in another location. They can tell you you can't use it, but you can give it to someone who can use it. They can tell you you can only use it for the next 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. They can tell you that your social credit score is too low. If you get your social credit score up, then you'll be able to use their money. It is complete control, and it is the most dangerous thing that's been suggested ever. Economically, it is the, from a biblical standpoint, it's the mark of the beast type stuff where you can't buy or sell unless you conform to their standards.
Wow. Well, it seems like that is sort of already in line with what the Chinese Communist Party is doing. I mean, the social credit score is a great example. They've already got this tight-knit, control over the society. I mean, it's a communist society after all. However, the U.S. digital dollar, right? There's also talk about a crypto form of the U.S. digital dollar being pushed. I forgot whether it was by the Fed or the Treasury. Can you talk a bit about that? Is it possible that that could happen without the form of control that the digital yuan would have?
Well, first off, it is going to happen. It's almost inevitable. It was in a COVID relief package that the Treasury and the Fed were teaming up to create a digital dollar. So everybody's going to get $2,000, let's say. They're going to give it to everybody as COVID relief. Well, you'll take it because you want that. but the level of control that it would provide at some point, and you say, well, our government would never do it. Well, they might. Well, remember when the income tax was first put in, it was going to be a 1% tax on the top 1% earners. Well, look at it now. It's on everybody, and it's far more than 1%. So it would open the door for really disastrous control. You know, when they talk about COVID passports, they're talking about knocking on your door to see if you had the vaccine. What if they say, well, you've not been vaccinated, so you're not allowed to have this money or spend this money? It creates opportunity. The reality of it is a digital dollar is inevitable, and unless we put safeguards in, it will lead to totalitarianism.
Wow. What do you think is the reason people are willing to accept it? Is it just ignorance? Is it because I feel like more and more people, they use their credit cards, they don't see cash necessarily as much as they used to, and like you said, they feel like it's just inevitable that would happen. Is it just the case that they don't see down the line, or they think it might be just a conspiracy theory that the U.S. government would ever?
Well, of course
do such
it's a conspiracy theory,
Yeah.
because it's a theory about a conspiracy, which is people wanting to have greater control. Of course it's, and there's no question we'll adopt it because it's convenient. We do things all the time for convenience, but there are consequences to those conveniences. And the reality of it is, if there is a digital dollar without safeguards, it will have those levels of control available. And you get a bad, nefarious government, and they're going to take advantage of it, and they're going to force everybody to do what they want. Remember, this country confiscated gold at one point. They said, you can't own gold. And so they literally went door to door and forced the confiscation of gold. If they can do that, if they can take your gold away, they can say you can only use this digital currency, and with that they can say, well, and Mayor Bloomberg tried in New York, you can't buy a 32-ounce soda. That's too much. What if they have access to your cholesterol scores, and they see that you're trying to eat at McDonald's, and they say, no, your currency won't work at McDonald's? It is an inevitable level of totalitarianism unless we put safeguards in. Just like when they put the Constitution together, they said there's going to be violations, so we better pass these 10 amendments. So we have freedom of speech, we have the freedom of religion, we have the ability, the right to bear arms, and all those things. They put them in because they were safeguards. And a digital currency requires that level of safeguard, and most people aren't thinking about it. That's our job, to wake people up.
Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the ESG scores.
Sure.
Can you introduce those to the viewers?
Yeah, so ESG is the popular form of social investing. So it's good for society is what they say. It stands for Environmental Social Governance, ESG. But really what it should say is E, meaning eliminate fossil fuels, because under ESG, anyone who invests in an ESG fund divests from fossil fuels. So they won't invest in the oil industry, the natural gas industry, or whatever. S stands for social justice, critical race theory. They're mandating that corporations adopt critical race theory. That's why you get Coca-Cola saying, be less white to their employees. And governance, well, the NASDAQ says governance means you have to have a gender quota on your board of directors, at least one woman, which is fine, but they also say one minority, which would mean gender-based minority, LGBTQ. So it's a gender racial quota. So E is eliminate fossil fuels, S social justice, critical race theory, and G gender quotas. That is not what Americans want. We've done polling, and we found that they much prefer LSV, liberty, security, and values. When you ask people, what do I want my investments to accomplish? They don't say solve climate change. They say my family and my country are what their two most important attributes. They want to promote patriotism. They want to promote family values. They want liberty, security, and values.
Wow. Well, and I think that's probably what they're going to get if they're educated and they have outlets of that type of, to invest in.
Which is what we do on the Economic War Room every week. We educate investors, consumers to weaponize their money to promote their values and pass their culture to the next generation. That's our raison d'etre.
Now, if you would like to follow Mr. Freeman, I'll throw a link to his program, The Economic War Room. It'll be right there in the description box below. And now that you've completed this episode of Facts Matter, I would highly, highly recommend that you go on over to Epoch TV, check out this awesome episode of American Thought Leaders, where Jan sat down with a China expert, and they discuss how the real estate crisis that is happening in China can affect us here in America. Take a look at the trailer for that episode.
The risk is not Evergrande itself. This is metastasizing into other areas.
China's growing real estate crisis.
One of the most common reasons for mass events in China is something to do with real estate.
Today, sit down with China expert Dr. Christopher Balding, a former professor at Peking University's HSBC Business School and Fulbright University, Vietnam. We discuss the Evergrande debt crisis, the hidden inner workings of the Chinese economic and financial systems, and Beijing's increasing aggression towards Taiwan. This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick.
If you want to check out that awesome episode, as well as all the other phenomenal content over on Epoch TV, I'll throw a link to it. It'll be right there at the very top of the description box. I hope you click on it. I hope you check it out. I hope you subscribe. And I hope that you join us on this journey of exploring this beautiful, beautiful world through honest journalism that is based in truth and tradition. Now, lastly, if you haven't already, smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe to this YouTube channel if you haven't already in order to get this type of honest news content delivered directly into your YouTube feed while YouTube still allows it. Also, consider hitting that notification bell so you can actually be notified of any new videos as we release them. And lastly, if you have an Instagram account, I consider following me at Epoch Times Roman. I publish behind-the-scenes research as well as spicy memes. And then until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed and stay free.